Alright, hello everybody. This is just a short kind of bite-sized tutorial on how to set up a simple Skydome for your scenes inside of Maya. So follow along at your own pace if you like, or of course, just kind of sit back and watch and then try it later on. So in the meantime, what I'm going to use is that demo scene that's available for you to download on My Learning Space. If you just head over to Content, then over to Week 12, then you will find that there is a Maya demonstration file that you can open up, and you may need to switch on some options, of course, if they aren't on by default. But as you can see in this scene, I am using all the kind of options available to me above, including it's textured, it's using all lights, shadows are switched on, screen space ambient occlusion is switched on. I've disabled motion blur because I think that's a bit pointless, and of course multi-sampling, anti-aliasing is on, as is of course depth of field, of view effects and all that jazz. So we'll talk about that obviously just in the coming tutorials, but in this one I just want to focus on the Skydome, which is of course this, if I zoom out a little bit, of course this massive sky that we see that surrounds the scene. And of course you can see the scene itself is reasonably simple. It is got a nice Skydome, we've got a simple kind of emulated school corridor here, we've got some buildings in the background in the shape of cubes, and of course they're kind of sinking into the water, but their purpose is actually just to be a background asset, so that should you be inside, it just gives an indication of a city that's further away. And of course we have an actual sun, of course, where actually notice my lighting setup's actually incorrect, but it works just fine. So let's take a look at the current Skydome mesh, just so that we can get an idea of how it's being made. So I'm just going to click that in the layer, in my outliner stack, of course. And of course we can see over here what we've got is something that is using a color input, and it is using an ambient color, obviously because it is a sky. It is something that shouldn't be receiving shadows, so its ambient color in this case is quite bright. In this case I've gone for pure white. You'll notice that if I drop that, how that changes everything and kind of brings that right down to a grey color. So we don't want that at all. So I'm just going to bring that right up to there, and of course that means it is a kind of light giving substance. Normally we would call that incandescence, but in this case we can actually skip the incandescence because we don't want it to produce light. But we can see we can actually buzz that up as well, but it just washes things out a bit. But it does give us a good control over the pastelity, I guess, of the color in this case. So you play things how you want. In any case though, we only need to concern ourselves with those two main attributes, and of course as an optional one the incandescence works just fine. So there's a few things that we need to do. First of all, one, I need to hide this current mesh, so I'm just going to press Ctrl H just to hide that. You'll notice that you can't select it directly. This is because it is hidden in a layer, which is of course this layer here, so you may need to select it directly from the outliner. So in order to make my own Skydome nice and fresh, what I'm going to do is simply go over to Create. I'm going to go to Polygon Primitives, and we're going to create a sphere. Now we can see that sphere is tucked away inside here somewhere. So I'm just going to grab this yellow transform, which we know is all axes, and just pull that right out. There we go. And then we'll just go to something that was reasonably similar in size to the previous Skydome. Of course you can see I'm not going too beyond the actual mesh there, but if I go inside we can see that of course that creates a surrounding kind of sky that we can use. In this case though, I don't need a lot of these faces, so I'm just going to zoom back out, and of course I'm going to chip these all the way. Okay. Now, if you're having trouble seeing that far, if you're having any issues there, remember you may need to increase what's called the far clip plane. You can simply do this by going to View, select Camera, and of course opening your attribute editor with Control A, or you can click this little icon up there. And of course we've dealt with this before. We can see the far clip plane option down here. Mine is set to something like 10,000, and that should do just fine. You can set it to 100,000 if you really wish, and it won't really affect things too much, but the default far clip plane settings usually a little too small. Anyway, back to the actual Skydome. We have a couple of initial problems. One, the sky looks and feels a little too tall, so we need to reposition this a little bit. So I'm just going to grab this. Now this isn't in the layer stack yet, so it's easy enough to grab, but I just want to squash this right down. The sky isn't something I want to look too far up into the sky at, so I find just doing something like this, and then I find I just drop it a little bit into the water as well, just a touch, and of course that creates enough sky space for me, and that's probably just fine. The next thing is that we just want to adjust how this thing might be lit. In this case though, we know that this is the inside of the sphere, so one of the things we want to do is reverse that. So you simply go up to Mesh Display and click Reverse. This means that the outside is now considered the inside. The inside is now considered the outside. In terms of that, just affects how things, how Maya calculates things like light and normals. But we don't need to worry about that too much for now. One of the big things that we can do at this stage is, of course, we can actually already begin to kind of play with this as a sky. So I'm going to assign a brand new material to this. So right-click on anywhere inside of this surface and go to Assign New Material. I'm going to keep it on the Lambert side of things because things should be nice and easy for us that way. We don't need any shine or refraction or reflection. There's no need for this to be a fancy material. But already we can begin to play with the color of this. You can see that has a direct impact. Or we can play with the ambient color as well. We can see we can bring that right up into just a simple grey sky, which in some cases it might be all some people need. And of course there are, oh, come back to me please. And of course the incandescence is where we can really light that up into something much brighter, something that gives light as much as it receives it. Well, it doesn't receive light, sorry, at all, but it does give light out. But in many cases that can actually be a little overpowering, and we just want to stick to the simple options that are available to us. So what I did differently in the last Skydome was I actually used a different type of 2D texture that we haven't talked about yet. So I'm gonna keep my ambient color up at white because I want to see my results directly. And in the color channel, you know, of course I could just pick a simple sky color here and we'll get that. And of course, depending on what you're developing, that actually might be enough. But in this case, I'm actually going to plug in I'm not going to plug in any of the other textures that we talked about so far. Just go to hit 2D textures, and what I'm looking for is a ramp. And a ramp's really interesting because it is essentially a gradient designer. And what we can do is begin to play with how this looks using really simple gradients, which gives us those beautiful, subtle, smooth blends between color. By default, we can see the ramp is, of course, between well, we can see it's black and white, and of course, you know, just by playing around with this, we can see how those black and whites play on our horizon line. So of course, this is a really good place to get started. So I'm going to bring those two reasonably close together, and what I might want to do at this bottom part is to start to change those colors. So you can select any of these dots and move them around. In this case though, I'm going to set this maybe as a nice blue, and then I'll set this one maybe as a sort of slightly darker blue. So I'm going to click that, and then we'll move that into here, and there we go. Now, nothing too interesting so far. So let's play around with this a little bit. So I'm going to move those and shift them around a little bit until I get something I'm really happy with. I've got that lovely transition, but if you click anywhere inside of this rectangle bar, you'll get another option, and of course you can change the colors on that. So let's go in and let's create that nice and you can see here as I cycle through these colors, I have all sorts of options available to me that can be stylish or fun, but of course I want to keep something reasonably fun and subtle, you know, that kind of early morning sunlight kind of vibe going on here, and I might want to brighten that up a little bit, even bring that slight orange into it. And of course I can play around with how subtle I want that to be, and of course you can play around with those gradients however you wish. And of course I find that maybe I'm being a little bit too quick on some of those transitions. Sometimes I think it's fun to add in like a little bit of pink here and there. Yes, there we go. That's a little bit of rougey color. Of course we can play with those color balances a bit better in here, and of course maybe even swap them around if you really want, and just play with things in a really fun and subtle way. There we go. So that looks alright. And of course, just by moving these bars and these gradients around, we can really get the sort of result that we're looking for. In this case, we can see that's reasonably fun. Slightly different than my previous one, but of course we can play around with that all day, and of course that can be really good fun as well for setting up all sorts of color scenes and all sorts of stuff, and so that might be really useful to a lot of you. I certainly hope it is. But of course we go back to the actual thing, we can think about changing the incandescence as well. The incandescence doesn't always have to be bleach white. You you know, choose which colors you want that to look like. But of course, that I find that it just washes a lot of what we're trying to do out, but it also gives us just another way of controlling and manipulating those colors on a broad spectrum a little bit quicker. And of course, you can even animate that if you really wanted to create some really great sense of light. So I tend to, in my Skydomes, just ignore the incandescence because I get everything I need usually from just the color and ambient color channel. And if I deselect that, we can see that that's working out just fine. So there you go. That's how to set up a very easy peasy Skydome. And of course, there's all sorts of things that we can do as well to make that Skydome a little bit more fun, such as using other types of sphere that we have, excuse me, other types of materials that we played with before, referring to the materials tutorial where we made clouds and little planets. Of course, you could create some really subtle cloud effects in here, either by sticking clouds to a 2D plane or by sticking some really nice materials to another invisible sphere that slowly rotates around the scene. So there's all sorts of things you can do, but in an absolute basic terms, that's how to set up a really simple Skydome nice and effectively, and I hope that helps you a lot. Anyway, I'll leave it there for this bite-sized tutorial and move on to the next one. Thank you very much.